In this lesson, we're going to look at some configuration options on the x-axis, the y-axis, and then see how to do a data table, which is one of my favorite tools. So let's go ahead and get started with the x-axis here. As you see here, I've got a typical table here. I've got my stores, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and some days of the week. Notice here that I've got 5/6, and the next date is 5/12, and then 5/16 and 5/19. Let's go over here and look at this chart. I'm going to scroll over so I can see my whole chart. And look at that. Excel has taken and put in spaces in between the dates. So when I had the 6th of May to the 12th of May, I didn't have any data points in between there, but Excel filled those. So it's more representative of a time series and how the data is moving over time. It's not really that accurate to put them right next to each other. So let's go ahead and see how to do that. I'll click on the axis and then go over here to my format, my axis options. And we've got an axis type. Now, normally, you're probably going to have this clicked as automatically select based on data. But you could also have it select as a date axis. That means that your axis is in dates. Now, if you do want to show those points right next to each other, it doesn't matter to you to show the gaps. You can always make it look at that data like a text axis. And then they'll be pushed together and you can see how it looks that way. There are some times when you want to do that, but a lot of times to make an accurate time series, you want a date axis to fill in all those dates in between the ones you have recorded. Now, another thing that you have here is boundaries, minimum and maximum. Now, with the amount of data we have, there's no real need to set the setting boundaries here. But if you have a lot of data, here's where you can set these boundaries differently. Maybe you only want to see the first 15 days of the month. So then I could go here. Let's just make it 16 to make it easy. And make this go from 5/5 to 5/16. And now it just limits what we see on the chart. And again, that can be helpful when you have hundreds or thousands of rows and you still want to make a chart. You need to limit what the boundaries are for your axis. And then the units, pretty much just leave those alone. You have major and minor units, and those have to do with one, where your axis labels are going to be, and then if you really zoom in, you'll see some little tick marks in between. If you do make this bigger, here's kind of the effect. Let me go ahead first and set the max back. So if I make the major every 5 days, then look what happens. It only puts an axis entry every 5 days. You still can have the little tick mark as a day in between each, but you only have an entry of every 5 days. This can be useful, I guess, if your chart's getting a little crowded, but we're just going to go ahead and leave it at 1 for what we're doing. And then you can look at the vertical axis crosses between dates or at a date and maximum date. It's really not going to have a difference here between dates and at date for this data set. But maximum date just puts the axis over on the right side. And that's kind of getting conflated with our secondary axis as well. So we'll just go ahead and put it back to between dates. And the last thing is the axis position. Now by default, it's always between tick marks. And that means there's a tick mark here and a tick mark here. Here's the axis and here's the data in between the 2 tick marks. If you want it on the tick marks, you have to click this button. But watch that first entry on May 5th. If I click that, I'm on the tick marks now, so it's only showing half because the other half is over here. If I wanted that whole entry to show now, I would have to actually back up the date. But that right there, how it shows only half when you're on a tick mark, that's a big reason to normally just keep it between the tick marks. That's the convention. That's what everybody does. But again, that's what the option does for you. And the last thing we'll look at is dates in reverse order. Instead of going from the earliest day in May to the latest, I could have it go backwards. Start with the latest day in May and go to the earliest. And then if you come down here, you just have some typical formatting options for the tick marks, and then the labels. Label position can be low. There's a couple others, but pretty much the only ones that are really meaningful are low or high. If I want the axis at the top of the chart, I can go high. And then lastly, the number. And right now we've got a date. Date is a number, and we could change the formatting here. I've got 23 May. I could go in here and choose a different date format. Maybe I want it to look like this. All right, well, let's move back here and down. So we're coming down here, and let's look at our table first. Now our table has a few lines that they're in the 7,000s, but they're all really close together. 7,532, 562, etc. All these entries are super close together. So let's see what that does to our chart. I'm going to scroll over and open this up a little bit. And now our chart has the lines for all our entries, but they're so close together we really can't see any differentiation. And therefore the chart's really not that helpful to us. Well, one of the things the charts do by default is they go from 0 to the highest value. And we may not always want to do that. Look, most of the entries are above 7,000 and below 8,000. So let's click on our y-axis and let's go over here, and we've got axis options. We've got our boundaries here too, minimum and maximum, 0 and 9,000. What if we made the minimum 7,000? Hit tab, better. Now let's make the maximum 8,000. Now we're starting to see differentiation. We're starting to see trends and patterns. Looks like the Dallas store is kind of trending down a little bit, whereas San Antonio and Houston are trending up a little. So this is really helpful to be able to change the boundaries or the scale of your y-axis. The one thing to be aware of, though, is many people are used to seeing it from the maximum number to 0. So they may mistakenly think, oh, there's a ton of variation here. In truth, there's really not a lot of variation. We're just showing it by zooming in on the axis, if you will. Couple options for where the horizontal axis will cross. Again, that can kind of pop up to the top if I do that, or just have it regular. Display units, if you have numbers in the millions or billions, you can go over here, and even the hundreds and thousands, and you can just click on one of these display options, and it will put the number in that format. And typically it puts a little notation over here on the left side of the y-axis. I'm not sure why I didn't do it on this one, but usually it's used when you're in the millions to make the entries look a little nicer. And then we're not going to worry about logarithmic scale, but we will talk about values in reverse order. That just flips the y-axis again to go from lowest to highest. So I'll take that back. And then the same options you have there that you had. And then you have the same sort of options there that you had on the x-axis. The tick marks, the labels, and the number format. All right, that's about it for the y-axis. So let's scroll down here and look at the data table. Now what we have here is just a very basic chart that has our 6 groups of data series together. Sometimes there's a lot of people that like to see all the numbers in a table format in addition to seeing the chart. And that's really where a data table comes in. Let me click on this chart. And the first time we saw this was back on, when we were on the chart design, back on the quick layout options. The data table's right here. But we're going to go and add it from chart elements. Come down here to data table. And you see there's 2 types, with legend keys and with no legend keys. Let's look at these real quick. So with legend keys, puts a little color and an indicator on each row where the data is. And you see in this data table how now we've got a table with all the numbers in it that represent those data points. Without legend keys, there's no colors there. And I can't think of a good reason to use this option. I always go with legend keys because that ties in the colors of the chart with the rows of numbers on your data table. So let's click that, and that looks really good with one exception. Now we've got the data table in there. Our x-axis is kind of redundant. So I can just go ahead and click that and hit delete, and the x-axis will go away. And now we have a data table lined up under our chart. First series here, second there, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. Sometimes this plot area can get a little off alignment with the data table, and if that happens, you can just click over here and drag it back in line so that each group is directly over the data table there. All right, well, we've covered the x-axis options, the y-axis, and looked at a data table. That's about it for this lesson, so let's get ready for the next one.